This is the man who roots for the wrong team. This is the man who once took his kids to a movie instead of watching the game, not because he didn't care, but just because he was that just hesitant to and just did not want to see the carnage.
Broken's the carnage. Or Mark, broken. I was that broken.
Broken. Yeah. Broken. Yes. Still, despite all that, I love and respect him. Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Appreciate you being here, man.
And just to clarify, because my son will come at me, he had the balls to stay home and watch the game live. I didn't. I went to the movies, just me and the wife. I was a complete wimp. Yes.
And that was the win, correct?
That's the one that broke the streak. Yes. Yeah.
I could have understood 2020, but 2021, you guys had obviously a fighting shot. You then dominated the game.
Which is why I couldn't do it. I just, knowing that, I couldn't do another loss. I just couldn't. I had to walk away. I did.
Before we dive into not necessarily just this game, but the rivalry and all the pageantry and everything involved, and folks, leave your comments and questions here. I would like to say this. I was curious. I was waiting on Steve. He loves the StreamYard app that we use. It's his favorite. Loves it. So I was waiting on Steve.
Yes.
And you know what I did? I did a little research while I was waiting, Steve, and I was thinking, how long have we been producing shows and going live? I found something in June of 2017.
Wow.
I didn't think it went back that far.
Wow.
You had your Detroit Lions English D jersey on, and that's I didn't even look past that, but that's could be the first thing. So it's been a long time. And little did I know at that point, because I went after you, because of course your college football knowledge and your fandom of the maize and blue, that we would have this bond as Christian brothers. And so that's what I value even more than that. So Steve, before we get started on this rivalry, thank you so much for standing up for the truth every day and for righteousness. That means so much to so many people.
Thank you very much, brother. Appreciate that. That's the most important thing. The rest of this is just all fun.
It's fun. Sure.
Yeah.
It's
serious. It's serious fun.
It's serious fun. Yeah.
But fun nevertheless. Yes.
That's what I have to double check with people sometimes when they talk about, I hate them and I hate this. And you do means like sports hate, right? You do. That's what you mean. I hope so. All right. Of course, we both think this is the greatest rivalry in sports. Do you think you can objectively make that argument? I know most butts in the seats, TV ratings, probably NFL players would be close to some of the other ones. It could be argued there. Could you objectively make that argument?
Well, I kind of feel like you just did. I think when you look at combined wins, win percentage, conference championships, All-Americans, Heisman Trophy winners, national championships, probably the only rivalry that approaches. So that's when you get into the pageantry kind of the sport. The only rivalry that I think approaches it is USC and Notre Dame when you combine the legacies of those two programs. But then it does that rivalry doesn't have the fierceness that this one does. And I would argue Alabama Auburn has even more fierceness than this one does, where the hate may actually be real. Okay. So I would say there's arguably more pageantry in USC Notre Dame. There's arguably more fierceness in Alabama Auburn, but the combination of those two into one spectacle, I don't think exists. If you want to say to me Army Navy is the greatest rivalry because of what it's at stake when they play every year. You know, my father-in-law was 101st Airborne, and I got to take him on a trip to West Point professionally when I professionally covered Iowa State football for a living, and they played a game out there, and it was the thrill of his life to spend 2 days on that campus. And my wife's an Army brat. You'll get no argument out of me on that if that's your argument. But that also kind of is a standalone transcendent event that goes beyond sports. If we're just talking pure sports, even great professional sporting rivalries, in recent times, we have seen the Red Sox and Yankees be good at the same time, but that usually has not actually been the case. The Lakers and Celtics is a great rivalry when they're both great. But right now, nobody really cares if they play on a Tuesday night in January and barely anybody watches. It's not Wilt versus Bill Russell. and it's not Magic versus Bird anymore. And so when you look at what has stood the test of time, and really, you're talking about two states, Mark. This whole thing started because they nearly declared war on each other, and the federal government had to intervene and took the Upper Peninsula away from Wisconsin and gave it to Michigan and gave the Toledo Strip to the state of Ohio, which, by the way, is one of the reasons why to this day it's pretty much a 50-50 Michigan-Ohio State hotbed. So I think when you combine both the pageantry and the fierceness, nothing I think eclipses Michigan and Ohio State.
That's well stated, and I would agree. I was driving one time from Ohio to Mississippi, where I at the time was living and broadcasting from, and it was the middle of May, and as soon as I picked up Alabama radio, they were arguing about Alabama and Auburn like in the middle of May. And that was what I ran up against while I was down there covering Alabama football, is they would say, two things struck me and stayed with me. One was that they would argue that we hate each other. You can't surpass that with your Ohio State, Michigan. And I did back off on that. And I said, you know what? You're probably right. I'm going to argue now that we have the best rivalry, not the fiercest. Okay, I give up. You do have the fiercest rivalry, but we have the best. But the other thing was the week of the Egg Bowl, the Iron Bowl, when I would go to these news conferences, that was the only game these coaches, the media would bring up, was because those people were tunnel visioned SEC and nothing else. But they would, that week, they'd bring up Ohio State and Michigan on a regular basis. So that's when it sunk in. Okay, yeah, this means something nationally well beyond what these other rivalries mean. What are some of your favorite moments in this rivalry?
Well, I mean, I was 10 years old when we moved to the state of Michigan the week before Thanksgiving in 1983. And my mom, my dad worked construction, my stepdad worked construction. So we moved all over the country. And my mom, we had, while we were in Florida, my dad was working as a boat builder in Florida. And I just picked up a love of football. My mom ended up getting a job as a stay-at-home nurse for a wealthy individual in Syracuse, New York. So we moved there and did that gig for a while. And then after that gig ended, we decided to move to my stepdad's home state of Michigan. And I just remember that very first weekend turning on this game, and I've actually got a DVD copy of that game now. That's the last time that this game was not shown on network television, was 1983. And both schools, their regional networks actually broadcast the game, which is weird. They were both actually very good that year. The winner was going to go play in the Sugar Bowl against number 1 Auburn, I think it was. And, just seeing those helmets, the fight song. I mean, I'm 10 years old. I fell in love, not really even understanding the fullness of what I was getting myself into. And, but that was really the beginning for me. The 86 game, because I had just gone to my first Michigan game at the Big House the week before, and we lost to Minnesota. Okay. We were number 2 in the country, lost to Minnesota. I'm in middle school. I'm almost like in tears walking out of the stadium thinking I jinxed the whole thing. And afterwards I get home and I read the newspaper, and Bob Becker in the Grand Rapids Press talking about Jim Harbaugh guaranteeing a win against Ohio State. At that time, I didn't understand this rivalry because Michigan and Iowa were the Big 2 and the Big 10 at this time. And growing up being born in Iowa, I had a bunch of family here. So I'd come back and visit for holidays and stuff all the time, and I'd hear it from them. And so that was really the team I hated losing to. This was really my baptism fully into the introduction was 83, but 86 was really my full baptism into the rivalry. Winner take all for the Rose Bowl. Folks, if you can go on YouTube and you can find it, that opening introduction prepared by CBS Sports with the Rocky music, it is absolutely still to this day, it's almost 40 years old now, and it is one of the best introductions to a game you will ever see. It is absolutely freaking nails, man, nails. And that was such a great environment. Bo ended up passing Yost for winningest coach in Michigan history in that game, and got carried off the field. It was an incredible game. And that was now, so my introduction, my first day at the church of this rivalry was in 1983, but my confirmation, my baptism was that 86 game. And the next year, of course, Earl gets fired. Bo offers to hire Earl because he's about to become AD to take his place, kind of jokingly. And then Ohio State goes out there and pulls a big upset and wins that game. I remember hurrying home from basketball practice in high school for the 88 game. And to get home in time to watch that game, we had practice in the morning, and we were all pissed at Coach that he scheduled a practice that morning. And so we are racing home to the game. We're up 20-0 at halftime. Ohio State comes back and takes the lead. And then John Colazar was one of the great Michigan performers in the history of this rivalry that no one talks about. Caught that huge pass, in 85. And then in the 88 game, he returns the kickoff to midfield. 2 plays later, catches the 50-yard touchdown pass that wins the game. The 89 game, Bo's final game at the Big House, 28-18. The 90 game, where all John Cooper's got to do is just punt the ball and take a tie. And he goes for the win, and Michigan stops him, kicks a field goal, and wins. And if Cooper gets a tie, Ohio State goes to the Rose Bowl that year. The 91 game, being home from college, and a bunch of my buddies all get together from high school and have a kind of a mini reunion and watch that game. And that's when Desmond strikes the pose. We knocked Kirk Herbstreit out, literally knocked him out in that game. The 92 game, Ohio State's greatest win ever, the tie against undefeated Michigan. The 93 game, I remember, was the first time I figured out that betting lines lie. And I was in a pool with a bookie in college, and he had Michigan listed as a favorite, 6-4 Michigan listed as a 1-point favorite at home against 9-0-1 Ohio State. And I'm like, come on, man, that can't be true. So I didn't even understand. I bet everything that I had on Michigan, not as a homer, but just thinking that line was so whacked out that it had to be a trap. Okay. And Michigan won that game 28-0, and I had a good Thanksgiving. I could just do this all day. The 95 game, Biaka Batuka runs for 313 yards. The 96 game, Michigan is a 17-point underdog in this game with undefeated Ohio State. And Earl Bruce does and I got to know Earl later in life when he coached our arena football team, and I covered them professionally. And so I got to hear so many great stories from him about this rivalry and Woody Hayes, most of them R-rated. And Earl gave this speech on local television about winning your gold pants and how bad Michigan is. And Lloyd Carr used that for motivation. And Sean Springs slips, and Ty Streets catches this pass, and you could just feel all the air come out of the stadium. The 97 game, one of the great games of all time in the series, number 1 versus number 4. Should I go on? I could literally do this every single year if you want. The 03 game, the 100th renewal in the series. And that was one of basically every living Michigan football player that could make it was there to form a tunnel for the Michigan team to inspire them to come out. I missed the games in the 70s, the 73 game when Ohio State, that's the year I was born, but Ohio State, I've got almost all these games, the actual broadcast. I have almost all of them on DVD now. This is where Ohio State comes out and tears down the banner. And then in 77, Ohio State was going to do it again. And Michigan had a bunch of wrestling and basketball and baseball lettermen that were on the other teams come out in their letterman jackets and guard the banner. And there's like pushing and shoving and almost fist fights because they're stopped. They're literally, as Ohio State's coming out of the tunnel, they are literally interceding to stop Ohio State from tearing the banner down. And like the fights have to get broken up and stuff. Okay. It was the 06 game after Bo died, 1 versus 2, the 42-39 game. And then the 21 game, the poetic setting, what happened there. Rodmore, Michigan's built a legacy of players Ohio State didn't want, who were great Ohio kids that we took and were great players. Rodmore calls game. The 2023 game's one of my all-time favorites because we hadn't won there on the road since Drew Henson went crazy in 2000. And the outright just blowout of that game, just 20 years of frustration. I mean, so yeah, a lot of great memories.
Yeah, you and I could go back and forth all day. You're making me feel old with the 1983/86 beginning of your emergence into it, because 1976 was the first game I remember, and I did not grow up in a sports family.
Mm-hmm.
And how I got in and just immersed in sports suddenly, like I was a Major League Baseball fanatic, reading every box score. I was an NFL fanatic, college football, Ohio State. And that was the first Ohio State-Michigan game I watched. And I didn't necessarily even understand the game of football that well at that point. But I remember no one taught me this, but when they're carrying off Bo Schembechler at the conclusion of that 22-0 game, I'm like so enraged and fury. I'm shaking my fist at the screen as close as I could get. I'm just I hate this man. And it's funny because we both have pretty good memories and remember all sorts of stats. And there were times I could remember everybody's stats in the major leagues and all that business. I now don't remember every Ohio State score. I used to just automatically remember every Ohio State football score in my lifetime. Now I'm losing it there, but I can't imagine I will ever forget a Michigan score in this rivalry during my lifetime. In 1981.
You don't know that Bo is from Barberton, Ohio. You don't know that he was the offensive coordinator for Woody Hayes while they were winning national championships, that he was Woody's handpicked successor to be the Ohio State head coach. You don't know any of that at the time.
Yes. No, not at 7 years old. I did not didn't know that. Art Schleister pulling off a 1981 win in Ann Arbor when it was snowing.
If Michigan wins, they go to the Rose Bowl. And
yes, and they were such an underdog in that game. Yeah. That was a preseason #1 Michigan team that didn't meet expectations, and that Ohio State team was kind of a ragtag, but they tied for the Big Ten championship that year. So that was everything to me. They're 8-3, they tie for the Big Ten title. Hey, sign me up. That's all that matters.
Yep.
Absolutely. Could just go on and on and on. And it was a rough go, those late 80s runs against Michigan. And you brought up 88. That was the worst Ohio State team of my lifetime. And they made it a game. They made a great comeback in the second half. They were down 20-0, took a 21-20 lead. And then, the Colasar plays. And they were nowhere near as good as Michigan in 89 and 90, but they hung in there and almost pulled off those games. And the 1990 was infamous. The John Cooper has got 5 future NFL running backs, and he has Greg Fry.
Greg Fry runs the
option.
Yes. Yeah.
At his own 30-yard line.
Yeah.
Yes. So sets up that was Carlson, right? JD Carlson.
JD Carlson. Yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So here we are in 2024, and you're riding a 3-game winning streak and 3 consecutive Big Ten championships, the national championship. And I know you hold very little hope. You said on Michigan podcast earlier today, 20% hope. That's about where I would gauge it, but I think that's more than a puncher's chance in this game.
I think we're just, we're in the in-between right now. We won the national championship. Jimmy does not decide to leave really until late January. So we've missed the window pretty much to add any of the quarterbacks that we could have had. Probably our choice of, frankly, being we're the national champions. We don't have a competent quarterback. I think the truncated schedule and having to assemble more of a coaching staff than I think Sharon Moore thought he was going to have to, Mark. I think Jimmy rated more of the program than anybody anticipated he was going to. I mean, dude, he tried to hire the freaking nutritionist straight up. Okay. I mean, he tried to strip mine the place on the way out the door. He tried to hire everybody. Okay. And hey, it's his program. He built it. I don't blame him for that. But so I want to make sure I don't come across as that's a complaint. I'm just saying, for a first-time rookie head coach, he ended up having to make several hires that I think the day he got this job, Mark, he did not think he was going to have to make. Okay. And And he's not been a coach for 10 or 15 years, and he doesn't have a huge reservoir of assistants and contacts to call upon at 39 years old. And I think some decisions were made that now have indicated weren't Michigan worthy. And I think I told you this before the last time I was on, that the Michigan network now is going to go all in to save him. And you saw the first confirmation of this with Bryce Underwood, where you have Larry and Jolene Ellison, the founders of Oracle, second wealthiest family on planet Earth, basically creating a separate slush fund. Michigan was already going to have an Ohio State level of budget for the transfer portal for this class as it is. They just called out of the bullpen someone with Elon Musk level money to say, hey, come get Bryce Underwood for us. Okay. And now I think you're going to see coaching changes made now too. And I think you'll see the Michigan network come to bear to help guide the way for Sharon Moore. They want him to be successful. He's very well liked. He has a commanding presence about him. And it's also, no one also wants to see the first black coach at Michigan just fall on his face either. So I think you're seeing all of that infrastructure being brought to bear right now. And so right now on the Michigan side, frankly, I can promise you those players and coaches are treating this like they did the last few years and 100% believe they can win this game, because no one on the Ohio State team's ever beaten Michigan. No coach, no player. And the only person on the roster who's actually won this game is Joey Velasquez, who used to play for us. Okay. So I promise you at Fort Schembechler, they're not listening to anything I'm about to say, and nor should they. And they should have their own culture. I'm not in that. I'm in the fan/media culture. I can promise you in that culture, brother, we are like, okay, cool, great. All right. When does December and the transfer portal and the signing days on the 4th? Let's roll. Okay. We're trying to get to the end of this season as fast as we possibly can. And we're gonna, and our plan is to do to everyone else what was done to us last year. Everyone else got to jump on us last year in the portal and everything else while we were fixated on winning the Natty. And now our plan is to do that. So for Michigan fans, we're in the in-between. There's really no score. Ryan Day could even put up his 100 that he bragged about in 2020. You'll get the same people that are opening their veins if Michigan loses everything on a message board. But by and large, there is no score that would happen on Saturday that any Michigan fan with an IQ in the triple digits and a resting heart rate below 136, okay, is going to care about. Last season, we won the Natty. Next year, the cavalry is coming, I should say. And so for now, let's just get this over with. If Michigan nut kicks you guys, we are going to belly laugh until we wet ourselves at the meltdown. Okay. But if you guys do to us what we all expect, I promise you, outside of message board genius communities, 5 seconds after this game ends, this moves on to the 2025 season.
And I get that, Steve. So I'm going to take out 1993 and 95 because of what you mentioned about the betting lines. Even though Ohio State had so much to play for and was on the surface the better team, the betting lines told us otherwise. So 96, 98. Is this just old age pessimism? Did you go into those games thinking, oh, we don't have a chance? And I also understand the business of football is so much different. We didn't have a thought about the business of college football back then and what's going on. We didn't have the information. Number two, it was very straightforward as opposed to all this NIL and transfer portal going on to have a big picture view of, okay, well, this game is not so significant this year. Let's look at the big picture. I know that the perspective was so much different, but did you go into those games thinking, we don't have a shot?
Well, 96, nobody thought we had a shot. It's funny, if you actually go back and watch the broadcast of that, you'll hear Keith Jackson at the end of the game saying to Bob Greasy, remember, partner, I told you I had a feeling that this just looked too obvious. And Greasy's like, yeah, you did tell me that. Okay. But in the Michigan fandom, nobody thought we had a shot. That was a team that started off very good, won a huge road game at top 10 Colorado at the beginning of the year, and was very talented and had no excuse for being where it was. 98, remember, we started 0-2 coming off the Natty that year, and then won 8 in a row, including we shut out Penn State, and then we had Wisconsin and Penn State were both top 10 teams that year. We held them both to 10 points combined in 2 weeks. And we actually thought we were going to go down there and win the game, even though that was considered one of John Cooper's best teams. We actually thought we're hot. Tom Brady's kind of found his stride. We thought we were going to go down there and win that game. And it's just Ohio State's team was at a different level than we were that year. But no, the 96 season, no, nobody thought we had any shot to win that. And then, the 23-point spread that this opened with, it's the biggest underdog in a game to open a game Michigan has ever been in the history of the point spread database. Now the game's around 20. There's been some years like the 2008 year, the Ohio State line closed at 24 when Michigan was 3-9. It did not open there. It just got bet up to that, So it kind of depends. Do you want to look at what the closing line was? You want to look at what the line was on a Thursday, But when the line opened at 23.5, that was the biggest opening line deficit Michigan football has ever faced. Not even the 69 team opened as a 24-point favorite. So
I guess I can't relate to this because I'm going through the years, and aside from 2011 interim coach, I got to go back to 1999 to when Ohio State had nothing to play for. Mm-hmm. Nothing, no championship considerations.
I was at that Michigan-Ohio State game, so I know it very well. Yeah.
Yeah. Tom Brady, 24-17.
To drive at the end of the game for Michigan to win 24-17, I think it was, or something like that.
Yeah, 24-17. Yeah. That I just can't relate to the here and now of this. This is still this important. And even before that, some of those late 80s, early 90s Ohio State teams that were playing for little, although it's kind of strange, they did piece together a lot of potential shots at Big Ten titles while they were down there, down as a program at that time. 89, 90, they could have won the Big Ten title or shared it. But I don't remember going into this game with this kind of thought that, I'm just big picture recruiting, player acquisition for the future.
It's a different sport now. You're right. It's a totally different sport now. And, we've actually not had a lot of eras in this rivalries in history where both teams have been simultaneously great. That has actually not happened very often. That's what makes the 10-year war between Bo and Woody so incredible. But this as an Ohio State fan, Bo was coming in at the end of Woody's peak, right? Okay, sure. And by the time that had ended, Ohio State failed to score an offensive touchdown against Michigan in 3 years. Okay, so that was really what you saw there in the 10-year war was essentially a changing of the guard. All right, Bo announces himself with the upset in 69. Ohio State wins or ties the next few. Archie Griffin is really the last great player of that of the Woody Hayes era, and
Sure.
Still one of the greatest players of any era, the only person to win 2 Heismans. But then you see now that first game you mentioned, that 22-0 game, that was the passing of the torch. That was essentially Bo saying, "I am no longer the Padawan learner. Now I am the master." Okay, and you saw then Ohio State's program, as much as it can, given all of its advantages, decline. Okay, we're only going to win 8 to 10 games a year now instead of 10 to 11. Okay, and then you have the 06 era, the 97 team the game where they're both in the top 5, the 06 game when they're 1-2. But then the last 3 years when Michigan beat Ohio State teams that were ranked number 2 in the country every single year. Okay, typically what's happened is one of these teams does something that pisses the other team off real bad, and then goes on a run, and then that run ends when the other team pisses the other team off real bad. That's kind of that. This has been more of an ebb and flow rivalry for decades. It's not been one where they are simultaneously. They're not Artaxerxes and Alexander battling for control of the planet all the time. A lot of times they're trading places. If you look at the history of the rivalry, Mark, a lot of times they're trading places over who is Alexander the Great, and in control of things in the Big Ten, right? And so this has been kind of a rare thing. What we've seen the last 3 years, we've not seen in this rivalry since the 70s when Bo and Woody were still here.
You made a response about a year ago to a question I had that I respect to the nth degree, because unlike anyone that I know of on the Michigan side or on the Ohio State side, if I ask which of these programs is the greater in the history of college football, all the Ohio State people are going to say Ohio State. All the Michigan people that I have on here on a regular basis, not media people, but Michigan. It's just like, the biased nature of sports fans.
Mm-hmm.
I did a live stream of about the 1997 disputed national championships, the split national championship, of which I refuse to make a call on. I can't put the two teams on the field.
I don't know how you could make a call on that.
Yes, exactly. You can't.
Yeah.
But do you think I had one Nebraska fan ever give Michigan any credit for anything, or say that they would have any chance? Did we have any Michigan fans who said, no, we would blow them away, they don't deserve it? So sports fans are who they are. But I asked you a question.
Here's my analysis of a Nebraska-Michigan 97 national title game. Take the under, okay?
Yes.
Because a one-dimensional Nebraska offense against that Michigan defense is not moving the football. On the other hand, that was a pretty pedestrian Michigan offense that year. That's why I had to keep using Charles Woodson to extend the play. And I'm not sure that that's going to work, down to down against that Nebraska defensive front that year. So the one thing I would confidently say, take the under. In terms of who would actually win, I have no idea.
I have no idea either. What I was getting to was, I asked you, thinking I was getting myself into a debate. We were going to go bare knuckles for the next hour. I asked you, who has the greatest program in the history of college football between these two? And you said, and you lined up all the side on the Ohio State side, and you lined it all up on the Michigan side, and basically said, it's so close.
Yeah.
I don't know.
If you look at the entirety of the history of the sport, Michigan does. If you look at the sport post full integration after World War II, Ohio State does.
Okay.
So it kind of just
exactly.
What's your benchmark starting point, right? I mean, Michigan essentially brought college football to the West. That's what Champions of the West means. It means west of the Ivy League. That's what it means in the song. All right. And so Michigan was the first power outside of the Northeast in the history of the sport. Michigan brought the forward pass to the sport. Michigan brought major conferences to the sport. Michigan brought platoon football to the sport. Michigan brought bowl games to the sport. Okay. And so Michigan brought mass Coliseum-like stadiums to the sport. Michigan brought mass marketing to the sport. All right. Now, but if you look at it from the beginning, the emergence of college football as a national sport in the 1890s,
influence,
then Michigan is. If your benchmark though is, well, you can't really. A lot of these schools weren't integrated. The best athletes, if they were black, weren't playing, didn't count. So you got to really start looking at, like, a guy I used to do a show with, Curt Schilling, who belongs in the Hall of Fame, by the way. He's one of the greatest postseason pitchers of all time.
Yes.
Curt used to tell me all the time, as much as he loved Babe Ruth and all those guys, you can't really count any records before integration. Babe Ruth didn't have to face Satchel Paige 5 times or 6 times a year on the mound, right? Okay. So similarly, if you're saying, well, the benchmark then should be post-integration, post-World War II, then it's clearly Ohio State. Here's the thing, though. The difference between the two in each of those categories is they would still be 2 of the all-time top 5 programs,
Sure.
No matter what your benchmark is, right? So I don't know how you would settle it. I don't.
I've got a book here, folks, Disputed National Champions. I'm not going to give you the long sell, but this guy right here, my friend Steve Deace, wrote the foreword to it, and the link's in the description section down below. So I thank Steve for writing the foreword to this. This is a passion. I dissected every year of the 1990s historically and set those years and those results into the present day formula and the proposed 14-team playoff, the BCS era, etc. So that was a fun project. Steve, I know you don't have much time, but I'm going to ask you to do one other thing. You have eloquently at times outlined the difference in these two schools, their approach to life and so forth. Mm-hmm. But that has also gone to the field, mm-hmm. where there was a time, certainly I'm not going to go back to Anthony Carter, but post Anthony Carter, where Michigan threw the ball as well as just about anyone in the country and had fleet receivers, great array of NFL receivers from the late 80s into the early 2000s and even beyond that. But here for a long, long time, Ohio State has built itself. These programs have very strong identities. One is more like an NFL team and the other more is a college team. And we throw the ball and you run and grind it out. Do you think there's any significance there, any symbolic thing that we can take from that?
I don't, because I think that a lot of that comes down to what's your coach really good at? Okay. For Jim, Jimmy broke from what he knows. I mean, Jimmy is one of the great offensive minds in terms of the running game since like Vince Lombardi invented the sweep, the power sweep. I mean, what Jimmy does, fans think they can call plays, Mark, because they can guess if it's run or pass. There's a lot more to it than that. I mean, the amount of looks that Jimmy can give a defense out of a running formation. So you don't know, is this a zone? Is it inside zone? Is this going to be an end around? Is it a pin and pull disguised as zone? We must have pulled our center, not your guard, center. We must have pulled our center the last few years more than any team in the history of freaking college football. Okay? Pulling your center, not your guard, your center. And so that was Jimmy, because that didn't work against Ohio State for the first 6 years he was in power here. I think panicked, tried to go get himself a young, fresh voice that would emulate Ohio State and Josh Gaddis, and it just never worked. And went back to his bread and butter and back to his identity. And what I will be fascinated to see, there was, to me, watching your team last week, it was the first time I've seen your team this year. There was one moment that I thought maybe what Ryan Day is trying to do is actually going to work. Because I've told you since and when I say work, I mean winning the national championship. That's the only thing that matters. That's a natty. We were a natty or bust team last year. You guys are the natty or bust team this year, right? Okay. And what I found fascinating, though, is that Ryan Day kind of, I thought, panicked by changing his identity and bringing in Chip Kelly and let's go get Quinshon Judkins and emulate the 2 tailback system Michigan has and run the ball, because you still got all these 5-star receivers. And I told you before the year, I'll be fascinated to see what happens when these guys don't get 10, 12 targets a game now, like they were getting before, right? And that moment for me, you guys had a 4th and goal that you went for like at the 3 or 4 yard line against Indiana and just ran it right down their throat for the touchdown. And to me, as a Michigan fan, that was the first time I thought, okay, they're buying into this identity. It's not just, they're not just, it's not just they panicked because they lost 3 in a row. But this is something that there's buy-in with the team, because I know that Indiana's defensive front is pretty good. And so I really think it just comes down to what you want to do as a coach and what you're really good at. Sharon Moore wants to throw the ball more, wants to. And if anything, that has hurt this year's offense. I think we could have run the offense that you saw against Northwestern, which is a poor man's version of the 21 offense, okay? I mean, Khalil Mullings isn't quite as good as Hassan Haskins, but he's a similar tailback, right? And people forget before Blake Corum bulked up, he was the speed back. People forget that. And so Donovan Edwards ain't quite as good as Blake Corum, but he's pretty good, right? Okay, the quarterback is not as good of a game manager as Cade McNamara was, but you can win a lot of games with the performance Davis Warren had on Saturday. And frankly, if you had played like that, thrown to 9 different receivers for about 180 yards and only 1 turnover, we're probably going into this game with a 9-2 record, Mark. Let's be honest about that, if he had played like that. So I think the detriment to this offense this year has been that Sharon Moore did not play to the strengths that he had. I think he wanted to show recruits from the very beginning, my intent, I'm my own man. I want to run a more wide open system. I want to run that. It's who I am. And I think at times by trying to throw the ball downfield and everything, that's not who we are. That's not what this team was recruited for. And I think it hindered our offense's development and identity. But on the other hand, if you have Bryce Underwood in town last weekend and he sees Davis Warren throwing the ball 24 times in the first half, that's the exact message you want to send to him. So I think Sharon Moore wants to be smash, but I don't think he is. I don't think he gets, I don't think an exciting board or whiteboard session for Sharon Moore is, Jimmy trying to figure out what are the 47 variations of pin and pull, like Schembechler and Woody Hayes, with an 8mm film in the Ohio State locker room in 1959. I don't think that's Sharon's idea of how he wants to run his program. Okay, I think Sharon wants to be smash, but with more of an Urban Meyer style smash, but with the ability to throw the ball around the field when we want to. And so I think that wanting to show that to recruits hurt our offensive performance this year. I do.
One last question. I'm going to get off of Ohio State and Michigan because I'm just curious, with all the upheaval in the SEC, with it being an extremely strong but deep conference and not a whole lot of separation between 1 and 8 and so forth across the nation, how many teams do you believe can win the national championship?
I think I don't know the answer to that, and here's why. Because I on one hand, I see a tremendous amount more parity. My end of season power ratings are telling me that Michigan and Georgia would be at least a field goal favorite on a neutral field over every team in college football this year, at least. I just off the top of my head, I would guess then that Alabama 2020 team that was so loaded, you might be closer to a touchdown favorite on the neutral field. The Georgia team of 2021, a touchdown favorite. An LSU team in 2019, maybe more. You'd be more than a touchdown favorite over every team this year. But here's my caveat. I've not yet seen what the wear and tear on the body of playing potentially 4 games of high-level football between December 20th and January 20th after playing an entire year. I don't know what that will do to the wear and tear of these teams yet. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. And so we could end up actually back to where we already were, but in a kind of convoluted way.
That's what I think.
That the season demonstrates week to week, the distance between the gap between these teams is pretty close. And you're seeing talent democratize now, like what you see in college basketball, okay, where UConn loses last night to Memphis, for example, okay, who's unranked, and they're number 2 in the country. So night to night, the talent is democratized. Guys don't want to sit and wait their turn anymore at North Carolina or Duke. I can go play somewhere else right away at a high level and win. But if you still look and see who wins the tournament, who has the depth to go 6 games in a row with different styles of play and tempos, it's almost always, well, since 2002, every winner of the NCAA tournament, Mark, has ranked in the top 25 of Ken Palm's both offensive and defensive efficiency ratings. Every one but one. And it was that UConn team that had to win the Big East tournament to get in the tournament and then won the tournament, okay? So except for that one all-time March run, every other team has been a team that was proven to be an elite team. That on a given night, they might lose to somebody that they don't deserve to. But in terms of we're playing the best against the best now, who can win 6 in a row, it's almost always been an elite team in a sport that's got way more parity than college football, right? What we might end up with is you might end up with Georgia still wins it all with the deepest roster, but with 2 or 3 losses, okay? Because now it's more of an NFL style schedule. The strength of schedule is harder now with these power conferences that are these super conferences. So the depth is there. The gaudy records maybe aren't quite as there, okay? But who can take whose third string right guard can come in and not be a fire drill to the quarterback if he has to play, right? You see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And we might find that the wear and tear on the body is so great after a full season that we ended right back to where we were before, just with more exciting football leading up to it. That's why I don't know the answer to that yet.
I believe Georgia's got the best roster 1 through 105. I believe Ohio State probably has the best roster like 1 through 25.
That's probably good analysis. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And I would be surprised, even though there is the parity and what you're talking about, because of what you're talking about, I think we're still going to, in the NCAA tournament, even though I've been separated from basketball for about a decade now, I think applies. If Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, I would have said Alabama before Saturday night, but I'll put Texas in there. If one of those 4 teams don't win the national championship, I will be somewhat surprised.
The thing you're seeing with Alabama, you're seeing now the 20 players they lost in the portal. The depth is not there. The higher end of talent is there, but the depth is not there. I mean, Deontay Lawson went out early against Oklahoma, and Oklahoma ran for 200 yards with one linebacker injury. That had never happened to Alabama even last year, let alone the last 15, 20 years. Okay? That's an example of what I am talking about. And I don't know the answer to that yet. You know, I don't. So I think we're going to watch that play out. Because here's the other thing too. While I agree that Georgia is better, man, 1 to 105, we don't have a clue what's behind Carson Beck, and the guy they were grooming behind him transferred to Kentucky and turned out to not be any good. You know, and so you could be in an NFL situation. Whoops, you could be in an NFL situation, Mark, where your season sorry about that, Mark. Your season basically ends if the starting quarterback is out. It doesn't matter how good the rest of the team is. Like the Chiefs can be as great as they want. You lose Pat Mahomes, they're not winning the Super Bowl, Mark. They're not. Lions aren't winning the Super Bowl without Jared Goff. Okay, Eagles aren't winning the Super Bowl without Jalen Hurts, and because guys aren't sitting and waiting their turn. You don't have the salary cap room for another first round quarterback, right? You know, and so again, we don't. These are things I think I kind of want to see how they play out before I give something definitive. But I will say right now, I think. Barring injuries, I think there are more teams at this juncture, I think, that could win it all this late in the year than I have thought in many, many years.
I interpreted that as you can't win a national championship with a third string quarterback unless you have the greatest program of all time.
You mean like what Ohio State did with Cardell Jones? Yeah. But see, this era, you wouldn't have had Cardell Jones, Mark. Sure. Cardell Jones is starting this. You know, he's starting for Michigan State, or you see what I'm saying? I mean, sure. Iowa, and he's making a 6-figure check. He's not sitting there. He's not on your roster at that. Hell, let's go back to camp. When it's down to Braxton Miller and JT Barrett, whoever doesn't get chosen is out of there. Mark, gone.
Sure.
You know? So
for the most part,
Cardell Jones finds out he's not in the running. He's out. He's already out. He's starting at Michigan State, Iowa, Wisconsin, somewhere else. That's the era we're in now.
Absolutely. Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. And for as much as I recommend Michigan podcasts, the Steve Deace Show, you want to get there. I am telling you, that is a listen that you don't want to miss. Yes, this man does great work each and every day, defending this country and defending the faith. Steve, we appreciate you so much. Enjoy the game. Don't enjoy it too much. I think it's actually going to be a bit of a fight, like a 2-score fight. And we will hopefully have you back on here sometime soon.
All right. Thank you. God bless.
And happy Thanksgiving.
You bet. Thank you.
We so much appreciate Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. Want to remind some people that we do a watch party every Tuesday night with the college football playoff rankings being released. DeReal MVP. Thank you so much for updating me on the time. I don't know why they switched these things on me, but the watch party will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight because the rankings reveal will be at 8 p.m. Eastern time tonight. And I am a bit pumped up for this rankings reveal because I just got to say that I'm fascinated to see what they do with Indiana and these teams that just lost over the weekend from the SEC. Bama was at 7. Ole Miss was at 9. Texas A&M at 15. What's intriguing about Texas A&M at 15 is they seem to be out of sight. They were at 15 before they lost to Auburn. I've got them dropping to 19. That's my predictor. If you want to see my predictions, we just posted a video yesterday with my predictions of what the rankings committee is going to select and unveil tonight. I've got Texas A&M dropping to 19, but you know what? they've got a path. They've got Texas, and then they go to the SEC championship game. If they win that, they would vault from 19. Of course, if they win the conference, then they're in. So it doesn't matter where they're ranked after that. They could only move them up to 13, but they're the SEC champions. Wouldn't that be something? So there's a path for Texas A&M, and even though Texas A&M most likely is going to finish 8-4 and be way back in the rankings, and then at that point, who cares? They at least have a path. These Big 12 teams that are 10-2 or 9-2 right now, that will most likely, but who knows in the Big 12, finish 10-2. They're going to get compared to 9-3 SEC teams, and they're not going to make that cut. BYU was 14 last week. They'll get knocked back to 16, 17, 18, somewhere in that range. Arizona State, I believe, is going to vault after the win against BYU. They were 21. I've got them going to 16. That's my prediction on what the committee is going to unveil tonight. So for as bad a weekend as that was for the SEC, with its 3 bubble teams all losing, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, and Alabama, well, they got safeguarded by those losses coming in from BYU and Colorado. So the only 2 teams that could possibly steal a bid from the SEC, I believe, would be a 10-2 Clemson team that just beat South Carolina, and or SMU going to the ACC championship game. Let's see, SMU came in around number 12 or 13 last week. I think they'll shoot up to 9 or 10. I think that's where I had them. And then if they win, of course, they've got to win this weekend against a bad Cal team, 6-5 Cal team. That's actually a lot better than their record. Anyway, they beat Cal. Then they go on and, let's say, lose a nail biter to Miami in the ACC championship game. Maybe you make some kind of consideration. 11-2 SMU, 10-2 Clemson, with a win that kind of takes the place of the Georgia loss for Clemson, that they make up for it by defeating an SEC team that would have been 9-3. But otherwise, this is wide open for the SEC to take all these spots. And when I say all these spots, I mean 4. 4 to the Big 10, 1 to the ACC, 1 to the Big 12, 1 to the Group of 5, 1 to Notre Dame. That's 8. Then you got 4 left. Georgia, Texas, Tennessee. If they win, they're 10-2 if they beat Vandy. And then that's 1 more spot for the committee to squirm between 9-3 Alabama, 9-3 Ole Miss, maybe a 9-3 South Carolina. And if it's not 9-3 South Carolina, then it's going to be 10-2 Clemson and maybe 11-2 SMU, and then a bunch of 10-2s possibly in the Big 12. But knowing the Big 12, they're going to cannibalize themselves another weekend. And what would be the worst possible scenario for the Big 12 would be one of these teams this weekend could lose a 3rd game and then win the Big 12 championship. And then you're looking at just 3 lost teams all over the place, and maybe their champion is 2 games behind Boise State. Boise State 12-1, Big 12 champion 10-3. Then that could be some issues for the Big 12. But we will talk about all of that coming up. Let me hit these super chats. We appreciate Mike being here. Down with those cheaters, go Bucks. Michigan sucks. And we've got Brian with what you're seeing with Bama is no Saban. Gotcha. And then we appreciate it coming in back from Mike 3883, who is Ohio State's 3rd string quarterback. What are they rated? Yes, they're pretty darn good. They're pretty darn talented. We don't know if they're any good. 8 p.m. Eastern time right here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you then for the College Football Watch Party